Hey, howdy, hi everyone. My name is Cole McCormick, internet's biggest Godzilla nerd, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Argue, although this one was framed more or less as Let's Agree, where I told you to give me your most agreeable Godzilla takes. So, less hot takes and more cold takes, I guess. Godzilla will outlive the MCU. I feel like the MCU is already starting to kind of come to an end, and what I mean is, I have a feeling that they're going to do Avengers Doomsday, Avengers Secret Wars, and then after Secret Wars, they're going to do like a soft reboot, and then we're going to get like new versions of the Avengers, and it's going to be like a new MCU. So, I mean, technically, yeah, because the MCU has to end at some point. You know, they have to like end the story. I would agree with you if we're just talking on just longevity. But it's just kind of weird because you're comparing a general massive franchise to a cinematic universe that is part of a franchise. You know, it would be like if you said in the early 2000s, I think that the Star Wars franchise is going to outlive the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's like, well, no shit, because the Lord of the Rings trilogy is going to end at some point in time because it has to. Whereas with Star Wars, it's a franchise that could go on forever. So, kind of a weird thing to say. I mean, it's like, well, duh. Kiryu is peak Mechagodzilla. Everything from his backstory to his design to even how he gave the original Godzilla a possible redemption. I feel that the Kiryu saga gave 54 Goji a near perfect ending. I would agree. Wow, it's almost like that's the point of today's video. Yeah, so what I like a lot about Kiryu is that it is a continuation of the 54 Godzilla and how it sort of continues that. Out of all the sequels to the 1954 film, I think that the Kiryu duology might very well be the best, because it actually feels like it deserves to be a sequel. It isn't just like they went, let's just continue the story so we don't have to give Godzilla a new origin. It actually builds off of the 54 film and improves it tenfold. Not that it needed to be improved, but you get what I'm saying. But Kiryu as a character I like a lot. I do think it is the best Mechagodzilla. I kind of go back and forth with the Showa era one, but with this one, yeah, I love it. I love all the elements of the design, but even beyond that, story-wise, I love how the 54 Godzilla takes over and takes control. It gives the character a really neat send-off, even though it already had a really good ending anyways. While some people dislike the later Showa-era films, I personally love Godzilla vs. Gigan, as it was the first Godzilla movie I ever saw. I also love Gigan as a character. He's brutal, sadistic, and bloodthirsty, yet cunning. Yeah, I'm not too big on Godzilla vs. Gigan. A lot of that just has to do with the tone being so muddled. It doesn't know if it wants to be a kid's movie or if it wants to be more serious and gory. And there are some other aspects to it that I'm really not a big fan of, like the overabundance of stock footage and the Godzilla suit just falling apart and decaying on screen. I just think it makes everything just appear so much cheaper. But Gigan is what makes that movie at least watchable. Yeah, kind of. I kind of agree with you, sort of. The soundtrack for Godzilla 2014 is extremely underrated. I think that Alexandre Desplat did a great job capturing the feel of Akira Ifukube's music while still being unique in its own right. I agree 100%. I said this in my retrospective that this score is absolutely wonderful. The music that plays during the opening titles, so chilling. It gives me goosebumps just like thinking about it. Like yeah, it's a masterpiece. I love it. Might be my favorite American Godzilla theme that goes its own direction. It is streets ahead of the Junkie XL scores from the recent movies, because those absolutely suck. Godzilla -1 will probably go down as the most important entry in the franchise because of how much it has legitimized it through critical acclaim, box office success, and the Oscar win. We may never get another moment like this in the series again. I disagree with the last portion, but yeah, this is sort of like one of those milestone releases. I think the big milestone releases for Godzilla as a franchise is 54, Shin Godzilla, and -1. Obviously, some people will be mad that I'm not going to say, the MonsterVerse is important, because it kind of is. But in the general public, I think that those three are kind of like the big three when it comes to very distinguished and well-respected Godzilla movies that are pretty much universally loved by not only general audiences, but Godzilla fans as well. Godzilla 1998 is an important part of Godzilla's history and was the first wildly new take on the character before Shin Godzilla. Yes, it did take risks, and obviously it is important. It's the first ever American version or remake, take on the character, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I think quality aside, I would agree with you that yeah, that's very true. It's very important, and it should not be like forgotten, or ignored. It is a part of the series, a part of the franchise, a part of history, whether you like it or not. That that is how it is. Godzilla is cool. Yeah. Godzilla can be goofy slash fun and grounded slash serious. Yes, I agree. This was a big point in my Dr. Skipper video where I basically said, what's great about Godzilla is the versatility of the character. He can do pretty much anything. He can represent anything. So, yeah, I agree with you. Godzilla Final Wars is a perfect tribute to Godzilla as a whole at the time of its release. It was both campy and serious, funny, yet has a sense of respect for what Godzilla was and is. I honestly think it is one of my favorite Godzilla movies just for that reason. I've said this before in previous videos, Godzilla Final Wars is the best Godzilla fan film ever made. Even though it's official, it still very much feels like a fan film. So I agree with you. It is a wonderful tribute to the entire franchise. A lot of people like to say it's really a tribute to the Showa era, but I would have to disagree. I think it is a perfect representation of all eras, both what has preceded it and what has succeeded it. Is that the word? I don't know. Whatever came after, I agree. I think that it's the perfect representation of the franchise. I want to believe that in Godzilla King of the Monsters, Anguirus' bones in Godzilla's lair is there not because he was Godzilla's prey, but because he was Godzilla's best friend, like in the Showa era. Godzilla took the remains to his lair so he could still be close to Anguirus in a way, and so Anguirus' corpse could rest in peace without being defiled by other titans or humans. I know it sounds like a stretch for the MonsterVerse, but I grew up watching Godzilla and Anguirus being a dynamic duo, and thought it was one of the best elements of the Showa era. That is one of the best elements of the Showa era. I just think it was just a neat Easter egg. I think that was more the intention, and I guess if you want to kind of get into it lore-wise, maybe, but to me it was just always like, it was just an Easter egg. It was just kind of there. I don't know. The Heisei era was an amazing return to the serious tone of Godzilla after the goofiness of the Showa era. It didn't fully bring back the seriousness of Godzilla 54, but it still gave us that more serious tone and put it into the fights in City Rampage. I would say at first, the first two entries are very sort of serious and, that's the tone, right? But as we get to like Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, it gets very goofy. We get to time travel, we get to androids, we get to the Dorats, and it's just like, we are right back into the Showa nonsense. However, another thing I have a problem with, and even what I just said there, the Showa nonsense, I'm talking mainly about the 70s era stuff, but the Showa era tends to have this reputation of being extremely goofy when a decent portion of it took itself very seriously. Godzilla 54, Godzilla Raids Again, I would even argue movies like Mothra vs. Godzilla, they all kind of have this air of like seriousness to them and really didn't get goofy until I want to say around like Invasion of the Astro Monster, but even then Ghidra the three-headed monster, had them kind of yapping to each other. So I don't know, but I would argue that it's not entire, like the entire era isn't all just goofy, So I would have to disagree. Tiamet was wasted in Godzilla X Kong. I don't really know how you can waste something that isn't really a character. I have to disagree. Apparently Tiamet is a thing in the comics maybe, but for me, I'm someone where if I'm watching a movie, right, if there's previous installments, I'll watch those, but I shouldn't have to read a comic to go, oh, I know what that is. It should all be self-contained. And that was one of my biggest issues was I felt like I was missing out when they were talking about Tiamet in that movie. It's like, well, what the hell is that? That wasn't mentioned previously. But talking about it being wasted, I disagree. I think that it was fine with what it served for the narrative. It was supposed to be a monster that Godzilla killed so that he could take over its lair and then become more powerful. So it served its purpose in the narrative, unless it's supposed to be more powerful, which, okay, but I don't know. I don't know much about Tiamet, nor do I really care. To me, it just seems like a Manda clone, and I still stand by that opinion. So hard disagree. It's like saying you wasted Skeleturtle. It's like, well, okay. Godzilla -1 is one of the best Godzilla movies to ever exist. It brought back the dark version of Godzilla. It brought back what Godzilla is meant to be, the horror and the consequences of the wars and nuclear weapons and the CGI. Do I even need to talk about it? That's why we got the Oscar, and about the Oscar, it was deserved, and not just by the CGI. You got to get better at punctuation there, bud. But what I will say is I agree and disagree. I don't agree with it brought back the serious tone because Toho made Shin Godzilla and then they made Godzilla -1. So that's not really bringing it back if the previous installment was already Yeah, what? I tend to just view the MonsterVerse as its own sort of entity and separate from the Toho movies. So that's why I kind of feel that way of yeah, it was serious with Shin Godzilla and then it was serious with minus one. And if we ignore all the anime shit, they went from making one serious movie to another serious movie. I feel like, and this is beyond this comment, every Godzilla like opinion now with minus one, people always say, yeah, see, there was a Godzilla movie that came out in the 50s, and that was really serious. And then the Showa era, all the sequels, those were all, really goofy and stupid. And then there were no more movies until Godzilla minus one. That's kind of how I feel a lot of these opinions are, and that's a really stupid opinion to have. Not saying this person that commented this has that opinion. I'm more just talking about a recent video that I saw where someone made that exact claim. But yeah, I would disagree that it brought back seriousness to the franchise when that was there even before Shin Godzilla. We had other more serious entries. So disagree. No bueno. But minus one is a fantastic movie and one of the best in the franchise. The MonsterVerse needs to go slightly back to its roots. Darker. I kind of agree, kind of disagree. What I think the MonsterVerse needs to do is establish an actual identity, because at this point it just feels like they want to copy the aesthetics of the MCU and go more that route, where I feel like what they should be doing is go back a little bit further to Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019, that aesthetic that they set up, which was already kind of MCU-ish, but take those aesthetics of honoring their roots, with Japan and with Toho, and go more that route than what they're currently doing. I don't think that we need to go back super dark and make it like 2014 or even darker like Shin Godzilla or minus one. But what I do think they should do is go a little bit more serious, less goofy, have less of an emphasis on Kong, maybe introduce more Titans, and add more diversity to the general MonsterVerse in terms of the monsters that we see, because right now it just feels like there's only Godzilla, Kong, and Mothra, and those are the only monsters that matter. Let's make it more interesting, It's hard to say it's a cinematic universe when there's like two main characters and that's it. The Godzilla series has shown how it stood the test of time with all its multiple depictions of Godzilla and the other monsters, exploring different tones and styles, diving into different themes and commentaries, and overall just evolving with the times. While the series might encounter a bump or two or fall into a decade-long hiatus, the Godzilla series will never die. Well, yeah, I agree with you. A lot of that has to do, though, with Toho managing the franchise that way and having it so that let's go a decade without doing anything Godzilla related, or what they're doing now, where let's do Shin Godzilla and then we'll hand the franchise off to a different director, and then minus one is released. And I'm hoping that the next movie they kind of do the same thing and hand it off to a different filmmaker and just kind of go off like that. You know what I mean? Where it constantly keeps everything fresh and interesting, and I like that. Also, I think that its longevity, a lot of that is due to the fact that there isn't really a strict continuity with the franchise, where anyone could realistically put on any movie in the franchise and have an idea of what's kind of going on. It's more episodic than serialized. Whereas in a series like Star Wars, where there's episode 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and then all the little spin-off movies, if you don't know Star Wars, I feel like it can be very confusing on where to start. Whereas with Godzilla, it's like you just fucking close your eyes and just throw a dart and you'd figure it out, because it doesn't really matter much. There is no strict canon. There is no continuity. Characters can be introduced and then reintroduced as something entirely different, and it would work within the narrative. So that's the big reason as to why this franchise has existed for so long. And it's because it keeps reinventing itself and keeps it fresh, and yeah, which I think is interesting compared to other more American Hollywood franchises, which do have canon, which are serialized, and it's night and day. There has to be a film that takes place in the Showa universe. Terror of Mechagodzilla was good, but it didn't really feel like it had the closure to be considered the finale. Also, the Invasion of the Astro Monster March is better than Godzilla's March theme. With the last one, I disagree. But with your first point, I disagree. I think Terror of Mechagodzilla was the perfect send-off to the Showa era. One of the reasons being is that it was the last Godzilla movie that Ishiro Honda directed. And so he directed the first movie, he came back to direct this one, and it works totally with the finality of it. The shot of Godzilla going off into the ocean is one of the most beautiful shots in any Godzilla movie, especially from that time. That right there feels like the end of an era, and it was. A lot of this movie felt like the end of an era, and I think that that's why it works so well as a finale. I also don't think that there's a point really in going back to a different era and trying to like get closure on it, because each era ended in a really interesting way. Showa ended with Terror of Mechagodzilla, which is a fantastic ending. Godzilla vs. Destroya ended as, well, the perfect ending to the Heisei series. And of course, the Millennium Era ended with Godzilla Final Wars, which also has a very nice conclusive ending. Going back to Terror of Mechagodzilla, and I guess the Showa era as a whole, the Showa era wasn't exactly serialized either. It was kind of loosely connected with all of them. Technically, if you want that big, bombastic ending to the Showa era, Destroy All Monsters is the canon ending to the Showa era. I mean, that movie does take place in the future, so if you want something that's more finale-esque and conclusive, there you go. It's all the monsters from that era teaming up to beat up King Ghidorah, and they do, because that movie is set in 1999, I believe. So there's your ending, I guess, if you want that. But for me, I always watch them in order, so I consider Terror of Mechagodzilla to be the ending, and it is a fantastic, conclusive ending to that era. And that about wraps everything up. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that, took part in this. It's like every single time I do it, I keep forgetting that people actually watch this channel. So I end up getting like 200 submissions, and I can't always read them all off. But regardless, if I missed yours, I'm genuinely sorry. Either way, I'm Cole McCormick. You're watching Firewood Media. And again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. Peace out.